He didn't introduce himself. He didn't threaten her with words. Cassian Draven simply placed a photograph on the table. Her brother, 17 years old, asleep in his dorm room, a red laser dot resting on his chest like a period at the end of a sentence, and slid a fountain pen across the marble toward her fingers. The contract was already open to the signature page. Elara Quinn had spent 11 years stitching people back together in emergency rooms. She had held a man's throat closed with her bare hands while screaming for a crash cart. She did not scare easily, but her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. What would you do if the only way to save everyone you loved was to sign your life away to the most dangerous man in the city? Because that is exactly what she did. And nothing, not her training, not her grief, not 11 years of watching people survive the unsurvivable, prepared her for what happened the moment the ink dried. If this story already has your pulse running, hit that like button right now and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because I promise you, what Elara discovers in Part 2 will change everything you think you know about who the real villain is. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Part 1. The call came at 2:14 in the morning. Elara almost didn't answer. She was 3 hours into a double shift, standing at the nurse's station with cold coffee and a stack of discharge paperwork that had been waiting since Tuesday. Her feet hurt. Her lower back was a slow, grinding argument she was losing. The screen on her phone showed an unknown number, and on any other night she would have let it roll to voicemail. She answered because she was tired enough to make bad decisions. Nobody spoke. There was just breathing, slow, deliberate, almost theatrical. And then a voice she had never heard before said, "Miss Quinn, don't hang up." She hung up. The phone rang again before she'd set it down. "Do that again," the voice said, "and your brother won't make it to his 8 o'clock class." She stopped moving. Around her, the ER continued its ordinary chaos. A toddler crying somewhere behind curtain 4, the mechanical wheeze of a blood pressure cuff. 2 residents arguing in low voices about a CT result. Nobody was looking at her. Nobody had any idea that the floor had just dropped out from under her. "Who is this?" she said, and was embarrassed by how steady her voice sounded, because nothing inside her was steady at all. "Someone who needs a few minutes of your time. A car is waiting outside the ambulance bay. It's the black one. Come alone, come now, and your brother sleeps through the night. Makes a phone call or walk the wrong direction." A pause. "He won't." The line went dead. Elara stood there for 3 full seconds. She thought about calling the police. She thought about calling Marcus, her brother, just to hear his voice, to confirm he was safe, and this was some elaborate wrong number nightmare. She thought about a lot of things in those 3 seconds. Then she grabbed her jacket off the back of the chair, told the charge nurse she needed 10 minutes for a family emergency, and walked to the ambulance bay. The car was there. Black, no plates she could see, engine running. The rear door opened before she reached it. She got in. There were 2 men in the front. Neither one looked at her or spoke. The partition between front and back was dark glass. The seats smelled like leather and something chemical she couldn't identify. Not unpleasant, just clinical, which somehow made it worse. The door locked with a sound like a vault. They drove for 40 minutes. She counted. She watched the city change through tinted windows. The bright commercial corridors giving way to older neighborhoods. Then to the kind of industrial waterfront that real estate listings described as up and coming when they meant not yet. She memorized turns. She told herself this was useful, that she would need to know the route later. She didn't really believe it. The car stopped in front of a building she recognized from the outside only. The old Callaway Opera House, shuttered for 11 years following a fire that had gutted the upper balconies and never been rebuilt. The facade was intact, ornate, 19th century, almost beautiful in the dark. But the windows were boarded and the marquee above the entrance held nothing but dead bulbs and old weather damage. One of the men opened her door. He didn't touch her, he just stood there until she got out. Inside was cold. Not the ordinary cold of a building without heat. Something more deliberate, more settled, the kind of cold that accumulates over years of being left alone. Her breath came out in small, visible clouds. What remained of the interior was grand in the way that ruins are grand, the skeletal suggestion of something that had once held thousands of people in its hands and made them feel something. The chandelier was still there, hanging above the center of the main hall. Whatever fire had consumed the upper floors had not touched it, but years of neglect had not been kind. Several of its crystal arms were missing or broken. It hung crooked, throwing irregular light from what appeared to be a temporary power source somewhere behind the stage. A generator, she guessed, from the faint vibration she could feel through the soles of her shoes. There was a table under it, just one table, plain wood, out of place in all that decay. 2 chairs, one on each side. On the table, a document, a fountain pen, and a photograph. The man in the chair across from her was already watching her walk toward him. She had seen his face before. Everyone had, in newspaper features, in the background of city council coverage, occasionally in the financial press. Cassian Draven was the kind of man who appeared in photographs at charity events and never quite fit in them, not because he dressed wrong or stood wrong, but because something behind his eyes declined to participate in the occasion. He looked, in every photograph she had ever seen, like a man who was elsewhere. He looked the same in person. 40, maybe, though she'd read 36 somewhere. Dark suit, no tie, collar open one button. A scar she hadn't expected. Thin, old, running from the left corner of his jaw up toward his ear. He wasn't what she would have called handsome, exactly. He was the kind of face that made you pay attention without knowing why, which might be the more dangerous quality. He didn't stand when she approached. He just watched. She stopped on her side of the table. She did not sit. "You have 30 seconds, she said, "before I start screaming, and I have a very substantial set of lungs." Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, more like the recognition of a move in a game he'd been playing for a long time. "You're not going to scream," he said. His voice was the same voice from the phone, low, unhurried, the voice of a man who had never once needed to raise it to be heard. "You don't know me." "I know you very well, Miss Quinn. I've known your name for 4 years. He glanced at the photograph on the table. "Look at it. I want you to know I'm not bluffing." She looked. Marcus, 17, in his dorm room at Aldermere College. She recognized the constellation of band posters on the wall, the specific disaster of his desk. He was asleep on his side, headphones still on. The angle of the photo suggested it had been taken from outside a window, perhaps from a roof or an adjacent building. And there was the red dot. Resting on his ribcage, patient as anything. Her stomach turned over completely. She made sure her face didn't move. "That's Marcus," she said. Flat. "Your brother. Scholarship student, 2nd year, biology. Good kid. Works 2 part-time jobs to cover what the scholarship doesn't. Doesn't know about your father's debts." She went still in a different way. "My father's been dead for 2 years. His debts haven't." Cassian folded his hands on the table. $312,000, spread across 4 separate accounts, 2 of which are currently flagged for collection by entities that are not banks. The people holding those debts have been patient because your father's estate made certain promises about repayment. Those promises expire in 11 days. "That's not possible. I handled my father's estate. I went through everything. You went through everything he showed you." A beat. "Sit down, Miss Quinn." She sat. Not because he told her to, because her legs had reached a decision independently of her pride. Cassian slid the document across the table. She didn't touch it. She looked at him instead, trying to find the angle, the tell, the place where the con revealed itself. She was good at reading people. 11 years of triage had made her quick at identifying the difference between performed pain and real pain, between someone who was going to be fine and someone who wasn't. She looked at Cassian Draven and could not find the seam. "A marriage contract," he said before she could ask. "Signed tonight, registered tomorrow through a private legal channel. On paper, you become my wife. In practice, you come to live in my residence under security arrangements that will protect you until a specific situation is resolved. The debts your father accumulated are absorbed into a trust I control. Your brother finishes his degree without interference. You resume your career as soon as the situation is resolved. The arrangement ends when I determine it's safe to end it." Elara stared at him. "You're serious," she said. "I don't drive people 40 minutes across the city at 2 in the morning to make jokes. You're asking me to marry you. I'm offering you a contract. There's a distinction." "What?" She stopped, started again. "What do you get out of this? Because nobody does this. Nobody takes on $300,000 in debt and offers someone a way out of it for nothing. What is it you actually want from me? Something moved across his face. Not evasion, more like the careful selection of what to say next. That's a longer conversation, one I'm not able to have here. Then I'm not signing anything here. You are, he said, because you have 11 days, you have no access to $300,000, and the people who hold those debts are not interested in payment plans. He paused. And because the alternative to your signature tonight is that I leave this table and the people I've been keeping away from your brother for the last 4 months stop being kept away. The word landed like something physical. 4 months. He had been managing something she hadn't known existed for 4 months. Why? She said. Not I don't believe you, because she did, and she hated herself for it. Why protect him for 4 months if you were going to use him as leverage tonight? That doesn't make sense. For the first time, something in his expression cracked open, just slightly, just for a second. Not vulnerability, something more complicated. Because I didn't want to do this, he said. I spent 4 months looking for a different way. She sat with that for a moment, then she looked at the document. It was dense, 15-20 pages of legal language she couldn't parse in this light at this hour. She was a nurse, not a lawyer. She understood bodies, not contracts. I want to call Marcus, she said. Right now. I want to hear his voice. Cassian reached into his jacket pocket and placed a phone on the table between them. Not her phone, a different one. It's already dialed, he said. The line is clean. She picked it up, pressed call. It rang twice. Marcus, thick with sleep, annoyed. Who is this? It's like 2 in the morning. It's me. Her voice came out completely normal. She was proud of that later. Elara? What? Is everything okay? Yeah, I'm sorry. I had a moment. I wanted to hear your voice. A pause. She could hear him sitting up. Marcus had always been able to tell when something was wrong, even when she was trying very hard to pretend otherwise. You sure? You sound weird. Long shift. I'm fine. Go back to sleep. You're supposed to be the one who has it together, he said, but there was affection under the complaint. Get some rest. Seriously. I will. Good night, Marcus. Night. She set the phone down. She looked at Cassian, who had been watching her the entire time with an expression she couldn't categorize. If I sign this, she said, and you don't hold up your end, if anything happens to Marcus, or if I find out any part of what you've told me tonight is a lie, then you'll what? He said, not mocking, genuinely asking. I'll find a way to make it matter, she said. I'm not sure how yet, but I will. He held her gaze. Whatever he was looking for, he seemed to find it. He uncapped the fountain pen and set it on top of the document. Elara picked up the pen. She thought about her father, a man who had been gentle and funny and completely out of his depth in every financial decision he'd ever made. She thought about Marcus, who still believed that the world was roughly fair if you worked hard enough at it. She thought about the 2 years she'd spent alone since the funeral, holding everything together with exhausted hands. She signed her name. The ink was still wet when the first shot came through the boarded window above them. Glass and old wood exploded inward. Elara's chair went backward as Cassian cleared the table in one motion, his body dropping over hers with a force that drove all the air out of her lungs. The chandelier above them swung wildly on its damaged mount. She could hear the crystal arms striking each other in the darkness, the sound like broken music. 2 more shots hit the far wall, then a third that struck the table and sent the contract sliding to the floor. Cassian had her wrist. He was already moving, pulling her toward the far end of the hall, toward the stage, keeping low in a way that suggested he had done exactly this before. She ran because there was nothing else to do. Who? She started. Not now, he said. How many? I said, not now. He stopped at the stage entrance, pressed his back to the wall, pulled her in beside him. His hand came up, 2 fingers, then 3, pointed left. She had no idea what that meant, but a man materialized from the darkness to her left, and she barely managed not to scream. One of Cassian's people. She hadn't seen him when they came in. More shots. Somewhere above them, someone was moving. She could hear footsteps on the damaged balcony structure, uneven, cautious. Multiple people. Cassian was looking at her in the dark with an expression she would think about for weeks afterward. Not fear, not even urgency. Something almost like apology. "There's a passage behind the stage," he said, low and close to her ear. "My man will take you through. Stay low, stay quiet, stay with him." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." "That's what people say when they're not going to be right behind you." He blinked. She saw it even in the dark. "I'll be right behind you," he said again, and something about the way he said it, the deliberateness of it, like a thing being chosen rather than offered, made her move. She went through the passage. It was narrow and old and smelled like mold and old wood, and the man ahead of her moved through it with a flashlight held low, and Cassian was not directly behind her, but she could hear him, or she told herself she could, and then they were outside in the cold, in an alley behind the opera house, and the shots were still happening somewhere inside, and she was standing in the January dark in her scrubs with a marriage contract she had no copy of, signed with a man she had met 40 minutes ago. She thought, "What have I done?" And then she thought, "What has my father done?" And then a second car appeared at the alley entrance, and the door opened, and the man with the flashlight said, "Get in," and she got in, because she had run out of other options an hour ago, and the night was not finished with her yet. The car moved. She looked back through the rear window at the opera house. One of the upper windows, the one that hadn't been boarded, was lit from inside. Not fire. Not quite. Something burning, controlled, the specific amber of emergency lighting. Then she saw him, on the roof of the building across the alley. Not Cassian, someone else silhouetted against the city sky, watching the car, watching her. Too far to see a face, close enough to feel the attention. She turned back around and faced forward and told herself to breathe. In the front seat, the driver's phone buzzed. He answered without greeting, listened for 4 seconds, said copy, and then said to her without turning around, "Mr. Draven is secure. He'll meet us at the secondary location." She exhaled so hard it hurt. And it was only then, in the shaking release of that breath, in the cold leather of the back seat, in the aftermath of the worst 45 minutes of her life, that she realized something had changed while she wasn't paying attention. She was not just a woman who had signed a contract to save her brother. Someone had just tried to kill Cassian Draven with her sitting across the table from him. Someone who had known exactly where he would be and exactly when. Someone with snipers and patience and a plan, and she had just signed her name to his world. Whatever her father had gotten himself into, whatever debt, whatever arrangement, whatever desperate quiet catastrophe had been unfolding in the background of her ordinary life, it was not over. It had barely started. The city moved past the windows. Her hands, she noticed, had finally stopped shaking. She wasn't sure if that was courage or just the thing that happens when a person runs out of options and fear becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you. The car turned north, and the opera house disappeared behind her, and Elara Quinn, who had spent her entire adult life putting broken things back together, began, quietly and without anyone watching, to understand that she was now one of the broken things. The secondary location turned out to be a parking structure. Not a safe house, not a fortified compound, a parking structure on the edge of the garment district, 7 stories of concrete and bad lighting, the kind of place that charged $18 an hour and smelled permanently of exhaust and leaked oil. The car took the ramp to the 5th floor and pulled into a corner spot between a utility van and a concrete pillar, and the driver killed the engine, and then they sat there in the dark and waited. Elara counted her own heartbeats for something to do. She got to 47 before the stairwell door opened, and Cassian came through it with 2 men she hadn't seen before flanking him like parentheses. He was bleeding. Left forearm, sleeve dark and wet. Held slightly away from his body in the practiced way of someone who has learned to minimize the movement around a wound. He crossed the floor without hurrying and got into the car beside her, and the door closed, and he looked at his arm for a moment and then looked at her. "You're hurt," she said. "Fragment. It's minor." "Let me see it." "It's minor." "I'm a nurse," she said. "Let me see it, or I'll spend the rest of the night assuming it's worse than it is and being impossible to talk to." Something crossed his face. Not quite amusement, not quite exasperation, and he turned his arm toward her. She pushed the sleeve up without ceremony. A jagged cut, 3 inches along the outer forearm, deeper on one end than the other. Shrapnel, like he said. It needed cleaning and closure, but nothing she couldn't manage with a first aid kit and some pressure. "You have supplies in this car?" she asked. One of the men produced a black case from under the seat without being asked. She took it, opened it, found it better stocked than most emergency rooms she'd worked in. She got to work without asking permission. Cassian watched her work without pulling away, which she noted. Most men flinched. He didn't. "Who were they?" she said, blotting the wound. "I don't know yet." "That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. You had a meeting scheduled at a known location. Someone knew where you'd be." She kept her eyes on the wound. "That means someone told them." A silence in the car that had a different quality than before. She felt rather than saw the two men in the front seat register something. She looked up at Cassian. He was watching her with an attention that was suddenly more focused. "You figured that out fast," he said. "It's not complicated math." She pressed a gauze pad down. "Hold this." Firm pressure. He held it. His hand was steady. She noticed the scar tissue on two of his knuckles. Old, well-healed, not recent. She noticed his watch, which was expensive without being decorative, the kind that told time and did nothing else. She noticed that he smelled like concrete dust and cold air, and something underneath that she couldn't name and didn't try to. "How many people knew where you'd be tonight?" she said. "4. "And you trust all 4 of them?" "I trusted all 4 of them," he said. Past tense. Deliberate. She pulled a butterfly closure from the kit and began applying them across the wound in neat intervals. "So what happens now?" "Now we move. There's a residence outside the city. It's been prepared for this kind of contingency. We'll go there, we'll wait for my people to assess the damage, and we'll figure out who made the call." "And Marcus?" "Already covered. There are 2 of my people in a car outside his dormitory. He'll have no idea they're there." She finished the last closure, wrapped the arm with a compression bandage, cut and secured it. Clean work. She'd done the same procedure in worse conditions with worse light, and her hand shaking harder than this. When she sat back, Cassian was looking at his arm with a brief, evaluating expression, like a man who has just had something done to him efficiently and is deciding whether to acknowledge it. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just make sure my brother stays in that dorm." The car moved. The residence was 50 minutes north of the city. Not a house exactly, more a converted estate, the kind of property that had been something elegant once, and had been repurposed over the years into something functional and secure. High walls, cameras she could see, and probably more she couldn't, a gate that required 2 separate confirmations to open. Inside, staff she wasn't introduced to, hallways that were too wide and too quiet, rooms that were clean and comfortable and entirely without character. She was given a room on the 2nd floor. A woman named Petra, early 30s, blonde hair pulled tight, the particular economy of movement that Elara had started associating with everyone in Cassian's orbit, showed her to it and told her that clothes were in the wardrobe, that the bathroom was stocked, that someone would bring food if she wanted it. Then Petra stood in the doorway and looked at her with a directness that was not unfriendly, but was not warm either. "He's not what you think he is," Petra said. Elara sat down on the edge of the bed. Her feet ached. Her brain ached. "I don't think he's anything yet. I met him 2 hours ago." "People come in here with ideas about what this place is, what he is." Petra's voice was flat and factual. "I'm telling you, the ideas are usually wrong." "That's an interesting thing to volunteer," Elara said. "Did he ask you to say that?" Petra's expression didn't change. "He doesn't ask me to do anything I do voluntarily." She stepped back from the doorway. "Bathroom has a tub. I'd use it. You're going to need the sleep more than you know." The door closed. Elara sat in the quiet for a while. Through the window, which was high and narrow and had glass that was almost certainly not ordinary glass, she could see the edge of a tree line and a slice of sky beginning to pale at the horizon. It was nearly 4 in the morning. She had been awake for 22 hours. She didn't sleep. She sat on the bed and went through everything she knew about her father's finances. Every account, every document she'd sorted through in the weeks after his death. Every conversation she'd had with the estate attorney who had told her, gently and repeatedly, that the debts were manageable, that everything was in order, that she shouldn't worry. She had believed him. She had been grateful for it. You went through everything he showed you. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes until she saw light. In the morning, real morning, gray and overcast, birds she couldn't see making noise in the tree line, a man knocked on her door and told her breakfast was available and that Cassian wanted to speak with her when she was ready. She was ready in 10 minutes, She didn't have much of a choice. The clothes in the wardrobe fit well enough, which bothered her more than it should have, because it meant someone had known her size before she got here. And that kind of preparation suggested she had never really had the option of saying no. Cassian was in a room on the ground floor that served as a working office. 2 monitors, a wall covered in printed maps and photographs connected by lines she couldn't interpret, a table with papers spread across it in an order that looked chaotic but probably wasn't. He was standing when she came in. His arm was in a clean bandage that someone had done after her. He had changed clothes, and his jaw had the early shadow of a night without sleep. He looked, not tired, like a man who had decided not to be tired because it wasn't useful. There were 2 other people in the room. A man she hadn't seen before, maybe 50, with the compact, deliberate presence of someone former military, and a young woman behind one of the monitors, early 20s, not looking up, typing with a velocity that suggested she'd been at it for hours. "This is Rowan," Cassian said, indicating the older man. "He runs operational security, and that's Danny." A glance at the young woman. "She runs everything Rowan can't." Danny still didn't look up. "Hi," she said, and kept typing. Rowan studied Elara with eyes that were neither hostile nor welcoming, just assessing, the way she imagined a structural engineer looked at a building he'd been asked to evaluate without enough time. "You did good last night," he said, staying low, staying quiet, moving when you were told. "I was terrified," she said. "Everybody's terrified. Most people don't move well when they're terrified." Cassian pulled out a chair for her at the table. She sat. He remained standing, which seemed like a habit with him. "I want to walk you through what we know," he said. "Not all of it is good. Nothing from last night was good. Start walking." He turned to the wall of maps. The attack last night was coordinated. 3 shooters on 2 separate positions. Professional spacing, professional equipment. This wasn't improvised. Someone built this over days, maybe longer. He put a finger on a photograph. Blurry, taken at a distance, the figure in it partially obscured. "This is the only image we have of one of them. Danny's been running it." "No match yet," Danny said to the screen. "But the weapon signature on 2 of the rounds is consistent with a contractor group that's been operating in the Northeast for the last 18 months. Same signature showed up at a hit in Baltimore last spring." "Hired," Elara said. "Contracted," Cassian said, "which means there's a buyer. Someone with enough resources to hire contractors at this level, enough intelligence to know my schedule, and enough motivation to move now rather than 6 months ago." He paused. "The timing matters. Last night was specific, not an opportunistic attack." "What changed 6 months ago?" He looked at her. "You came to my attention." The room was very quiet for a moment. Rowan had turned to look out the window. Danny's typing had not slowed. "Explain that," Elara said, carefully. "Your father's name appeared in a document that crossed my desk 4 years ago. A financial record, partial, heavily redacted, leaked from a source I was never able to fully identify. His name was connected to a series of transactions that ran through 3 different shell companies over a period of about 8 years. The amounts were significant." He paused. "He wasn't the origin of the money. He was a conduit. Someone was moving funds through accounts connected to him, using his financial identity without his full understanding of what it was financing." Elara felt something cold settle into her chest. "You're saying my father was used?" "I'm saying your father was compromised, whether willingly, unknowingly, or under duress. I don't know. What I know is that the money moving through his accounts came from somewhere above his level and went somewhere I haven't been able to trace. And the debts are real, but they're not his. They're leverage. Someone created them and attached them to his estate specifically so that someone could use them on you." She sat with that for a moment. She thought about her father, a man who had spent 30 years doing tax preparation for small businesses, who had kept a paper ledger, who had once spent 40 minutes on the phone trying to return an overcharge from a utility company. A man completely out of his depth in something he probably hadn't understood until it was already around him. "Someone wanted leverage over me specifically," she said. "Yes." "Why?" Cassian turned back from the wall. The expression on his face was one she hadn't seen from him yet. Not the cold calculation of the opera house. Not the controlled urgency of the night before. Something more careful. Like a man approaching an edge he can see but isn't sure of the depth. "That's the part I haven't been able to answer. But whoever attacked us last night, they moved the moment you signed that contract, the moment you became connected to me. So I'm not just a target because of you, she said. I was already a target. You connected yourself to me. He didn't answer, which was, she was beginning to understand, how Cassian Draven said yes. Rowan turned from the window. We need to talk about the list, he said. His voice was flat, and it was addressed to Cassian, not to her, and it had the specific weight of something that had been postponed. Cassian's jaw tightened. Later. It's not a later conversation. We had 4 people who knew last night's location. As of an hour ago, I've ruled out 2 of them. He paused. Which leaves Victor and Chen. The name hit the room differently than anything else had. Elara watched Cassian go very still. Not the controlled stillness of the opera house, a different kind. The kind that happens when something unexpected strikes something protected. Victor has been with me for 9 years, Cassian said. His voice was exactly the same. That was what told her it was hitting him. I know, Rowan said. Chen has been with us for 6. I know that too. You're telling me one of 2 people I trust absolutely is the source. I'm telling you the math doesn't allow for another option. Rowan's voice was not without compassion, but it was without softness. The attack was too precise, too timed. The only way they hit that building at that moment is if someone told them you'd signed the contract. Someone who was watching in real time. Cassian turned to the wall of maps again. He stood there for long enough that the quality of the silence in the room changed. Elara looked at Rowan, who looked back at her with the expression of a man who had delivered this kind of information before and knew there was nothing useful to add to it. Run them both, Cassian said finally. Full audit. Communications, financials, movement, everything. Already started, Danny said. Don't tell either of them. Wasn't planning to. He turned around. He looked at Elara, and for a moment she saw it. The actual cost of what he was doing. Not in weakness, not in collapse. In the specific precision of a man who had spent years building a world with certain people at the center of it, and who was now methodically determining which one of those people had tried to have him killed. I need to ask you something, he said. Ask. The name Silas Mercer. Your father ever mention it? She ran through everything. Her father's clients, his colleagues, the occasional names that had come up over the years at the dinner table. A long search. No, she said. I don't think so. Why? Cassian looked at Rowan. Rowan reached into a folder on the table and produced a photograph. He set it in front of Elara. A press photo. The kind taken at public events. A man at a podium, mid-gesture, the energy of a man used to rooms going quiet when he spoke. She recognized him. Everyone recognized him. That's Silas Mercer, she said. The district attorney. His name is in the partial document your father's identity appears in, Cassian said. Not connected to the transactions directly. In a notation on the margin of one page. Handwritten. In ink. He paused. It's the only handwritten element in an entirely digital document. Which means someone wanted it found, she said, or someone wanted to make sure it wasn't missed if the right person was looking. He sat down across from her for the first time. He put his forearms on the table, careful with the bandaged one, and looked at her with the direct, unornamented attention that she was beginning to recognize as his actual mode of engagement. The coldness she'd seen at the opera house wasn't coldness, she was starting to think. It was just what a man looked like when he'd taught himself to process everything before it showed. I want you to understand your situation fully. You are here because the contract creates a legal and structural connection between you and the Draven name. That connection provides you certain protections under arrangements I have with several parties, but it also makes you a more visible target. You're telling me you made things more dangerous for me. I'm telling you it was already dangerous and you didn't know it. The contract gave you protection you didn't have before, but it also... He stopped. Something in his expression was working. I underestimated how fast they'd move. Who is they? I don't know yet. How do you not know yet? She gestured, meaning everything, the maps, the staff, the estate. You're supposed to know everything. I know a great deal, he said. I don't know this. And the honest version of that is that something has been built above my sight line, and I've been operating under the assumption that I knew where all the ceilings were. A knock at the door. Petra came in without waiting. She looked at Cassian and said, Victor's on the line. He wants to know where we are. The room locked up for a second. Cassian looked at Rowan. Rowan looked at the floor. Tell him we're secure and we'll debrief at 1800, Cassian said. Don't tell him the location. Petra nodded and left. The silence after was not comfortable. If it's Victor, Elara said, he'll know you're avoiding him. Yes. And if it's not Victor, then it's Chen, and Chen is running a network audit for me right now, and will know the moment I lock her out of anything. He stood up. There is no version of this that isn't ugly. No, she said. There usually isn't. He looked at her. You're remarkably composed for someone who got pulled out of a hospital at 2 a.m. and shot at. I don't have the luxury of not being composed, she said. I have a brother in a dormitory, and a father who apparently spent 15 years neck deep in something he probably couldn't explain, and now I'm somewhere outside the city with a man I've known for 6 hours who is deciding which of his 2 most trusted people sold him out. I can fall apart later. Right now I want to know what I can actually do. He studied her. What do you mean? I mean, I'm not cargo, she said. I'm not something to be moved from location to location while you sort out your problems. My father's name is in your document. Whatever this is, I'm already in it. Tell me what I can actually do. Rowan coughed. Not a real cough. The kind that meant he was recalibrating something. Cassian looked at him. Some unspoken thing passed between them. There's a secondary file, Cassian said slowly. Your father, the estate. Is there anything you kept? Documents, storage units, anything the estate attorney didn't take? There's a lockbox, she said, at a safe deposit vault on Mercer Street. I've had it since he died. His personal things, photographs, letters, a flash drive I assumed was personal records. She stopped. I haven't opened the drive. The quality of the silence changed again. Danny had stopped typing. Why not? Cassian asked. Because I was trying to let him be dead, she said. It came out harder than she meant it to. Because I spent 6 months handling his affairs and talking to attorneys and sorting through every piece of his life, and I needed one thing I could leave alone, so I left the drive alone. Nobody said anything. Nobody offered anything to fill the space with, which was, she realized, exactly right. You think it matters, she said. I think it might be the most important thing in the room right now, Cassian said. And I think whatever your father left on that drive, he left it there for a reason. He paused. The vault is in the city. Yes. Going back into the city is a risk. I understand that. Elara. He said her name for the first time, and it landed differently than she expected. Not possessive, not strategic, like something being chosen carefully. If that drive contains what I think it might contain, the people who attacked us last night will know we're looking for it. Going for it puts you in the open. Then tell me about staying here while you send someone else, she said. Tell me what happens if someone else looks at the drive and it turns out you don't actually trust them, or I don't, or whoever's watching the vault sees your face instead of mine and does something about it. He didn't answer. Right, she said. So we go together. Rowan made a sound that wasn't quite a word. The 2 of us, Cassian said, plus security. The 2 of us plus minimum security, she said. We go in looking like a couple running an errand, not like an armed convoy, because the moment it looks like an armed convoy, every camera in the city is watching us. Cassian looked at her for a long moment. She held it. You've thought about this, he said. I've had 6 hours to think about nothing else, she said. Are we going or not? They left at mid-morning. Elara in street clothes that almost fit, Cassian in a jacket that made him look something close to ordinary. Not convincingly, but closer. 2 additional vehicles in a loose perimeter she was told not to acknowledge. They were, on paper, exactly what they looked like. 2 people who had somewhere to be. The vault was a 20-minute drive. The city moved around them like it always did, indifferent to everything happening inside this particular car. And Elara watched it and felt the specific disorientation of moving through a world that hadn't changed at all while she had been transformed, quietly and completely, into someone she didn't yet recognize. She got the lockbox. She signed for it. She sat at the small private table they provided and opened it with the key she'd carried on her keychain for 2 years without ever asking it a question. The drive was there, small, black, the kind sold in any office supply store. She held it in her palm for a second. Then she put it in her pocket and closed the lockbox and signed out. In the car, she gave it to Cassian without being asked. He passed it to the back of the vehicle where a device she didn't recognize was waiting. Danny's voice came over Cassian's phone on speaker, already ready. "Give me 2 minutes." They sat. The car was parked in a structure 3 blocks from the vault. 1 minute. Cassian's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Something in his face changed, a small, precise shift, like a fault line moving. He turned the screen toward her. It was a text from a number she didn't know. 5 words. "Victor is dead." "I'm sorry." The car was very quiet. Elara looked at Cassian, who was looking at the screen with the expression of a man who is making himself keep the full weight of a thing at a measured distance, because if he let it in all at once, he wouldn't be functional, and he needed to be functional right now more than he needed to feel anything. "Who sent that?" she said. He stared at the screen for 1 more second, then put the phone face down on the seat. "Chen," he said. "Victor's dead." Which means Victor wasn't the one, he said. "Which means Chen has been inside my operation for 6 years, and I looked at her every single day and never once." He stopped. Danny's voice came over the phone. "I'm in the drive. Elara, your father has been keeping records, a lot of records, going back to 2009. A pause, the kind that meant she was reading, fast, and what she was reading was not expected. There are wire transfers here, documented, with originating accounts." "Whose accounts?" Cassian said. Another pause. "The transfers are authorized under the signature of a legal entity registered to a holding company," Danny said slowly. "The holding company is a shell, but the authorized signatory for the shell." The pause stretched 1 beat past what was comfortable. "It's Silas Mercer, his personal legal seal, on 16 separate transfers over 9 years. Elara felt the car shrink. "My father knew," she said. "He had the evidence and he kept it." "He kept it and never used it," Cassian said, and his voice had gone somewhere quiet and deliberate. "Which means someone knew he had it, and someone made sure he couldn't." The drive was still in the device. Outside, the city continued. Somewhere across town, Victor was dead. Somewhere inside Cassian's organization, Chen had spent 6 years learning everything there was to know and feeding it to people who had just used that information to open fire on an abandoned opera house with a nurse sitting inside it. Elara looked at her own hands in her lap. Clean, ordinary. The hands she used to close wounds with. She thought about her father at his desk with his paper ledger and his careful arithmetic, sitting on 16 transfers that could have ended a man's career, keeping them in a lockbox with his personal photographs because he was afraid, or because he was waiting, or because he never figured out who to trust with them. She thought about the word trust. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She looked at Cassian. He nodded. She answered. "Miss Quinn," a voice she didn't know, male, measured, with the specific warmth of a man accustomed to being believed. "My name is Silas Mercer. I think it's time we had a conversation, don't you?" Elara held the phone against her ear and did not move. Cassian was watching her with an attention so precise it felt physical. She could hear him breathing, slow, controlled, the kind of breathing that required active maintenance. His hand had moved to the door handle, not gripping it, just resting there, ready. "How did you get this number?" she said. "Miss Quinn." Mercer's voice was patient, almost kind, the warmth of a man who had spent decades in rooms where people needed to believe him. "I've had your number for quite some time, along with a great many other things. I'm calling because I think the situation has become unnecessarily complicated, and I believe we can simplify it considerably if you're willing to have an honest conversation. With the man who just had Victor killed." A pause. Very brief. Then, "I don't know what you've been told about last night, but I want you to understand that I am not your enemy. The people around you have a considerable interest in making you believe otherwise. You called to tell me you're not my enemy. I called to tell you that your father was a good man who made a single terrible mistake, and that the people exploiting that mistake are not the people you think they are." Another pause, longer this time, calibrated. "I knew your father, Elara, Thomas Quinn. He used to bring coffee to the office when he came to file his annual reporting. Terrible coffee. He always forgot I took it black. But he was a decent man who got in over his head and came to me for help." Her mouth went dry. Cassian reached over slowly and put 2 fingers on her wrist. Not grabbing, just contact, steadying. She looked at him and he held up his palm. Keep him talking. When did he come to you? She said. 2011. He'd already been involved for 2 years by then, and he was frightened. He came to my office through back channels, the way people do when they're afraid to come through the front. He brought documentation. He told me everything. The warmth in Mercer's voice deepened into something that almost sounded like grief. I told him I would protect him. I told him to keep the record safe and to keep his head down and to trust me. And then he died, she said. Yes. A beat. He died. And I never stopped believing that wasn't an accident. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds. Behind them, her father's face, his desk, his paper ledger, the specific way he held his coffee mug in both hands even when it wasn't cold. You're telling me you were protecting him, she said. I'm telling you I tried to, and I'm telling you that the man sitting next to you right now has a very compelling reason to make sure you never find out what was actually in those records. Mercer's voice stayed level, no urgency. Just the steady delivery of a man offering something he wants you to take as logic rather than manipulation. The transfers on that drive, Elara, look at where they terminate, not where they originate. Follow them to the end. The line clicked. He was gone. She lowered the phone. The car was very quiet. Cassian was looking at her with an expression she'd seen once before. At the opera house, right before she signed. The careful selection of what to say. She felt something in her chest shift, not trust, but the withdrawal of the provisional trust she'd been extending, pulling it back like a hand off a hot surface. What did he say? Cassian asked. He said to follow the transfers to the end, she said, not where they originate, where they terminate. She watched his face. There was a half second, just half a second, where something moved behind his eyes that was not quite surprise and not quite nothing. Danny, he said to the phone. The transfer's on the drive. Trace the terminal accounts. Already on it, Danny said. Give me 4 minutes. Elara looked out the window. The parking structure was gray and low and smelled like everything parking structures smell like. And she thought, I am sitting in a car with a man I have known for 12 hours, and I have no way of knowing, none, whether the story he has told me is the real one or the one designed to produce exactly this outcome. Tell me something, she said. She kept her voice even. Cassian, not your people, not Rowan, not Danny, you. Tell me where those transfers end. He held her gaze. I don't know. Don't. I genuinely don't know where they terminate. I've been working from the originating end for 4 years. I have never been able to get to the other side of those transactions. Because they terminate somewhere you don't want me to see. Because they terminate somewhere I have never been able to access. He said it without heat, without defense. Level. If Mercer is telling you to look at the terminal accounts, one of 2 things is true. Either the terminal accounts expose him, which means he's lying about what they contain and he just gave you bad advice hoping you wouldn't check. Or the terminal accounts expose you, she said. Or they expose me. He didn't look away. And if that's what's on that drive, then I need to know it as badly as you do, because it would mean someone has been running this whole architecture through my organization for years without my knowledge, and I have been used as thoroughly as your father was. She searched his face. She was good at this, reading people, reading the distance between what they said and what their body was doing while they said it. His hands were still, his breathing was still controlled, his eyes were direct, and this was the part she kept coming back to, the part she couldn't explain cleanly, tired in a way that performance didn't produce. There was a specific quality to the exhaustion behind his eyes that she associated with people who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had stopped pretending it was light. She had no way to be certain. She had 12 hours of data and a dead man named Victor, and a father who had kept a flash drive in a lockbox for 2 years without ever asking her to look at it. Danny, she said, directly into the phone. A pause. Yeah? The terminal accounts. Don't tell Cassian. Tell me. Longer pause. Danny, Cassian said. She asked me first, Danny said. Elara looked at Cassian. He looked back at her. Something passed between them that wasn't trust and wasn't its opposite. More like the acknowledgement that they were both in the same impossible position and neither one of them had a clean hand to play. Okay, he said. And he meant it. She could see that he meant it, and hated that she was already learning to read him. 3 minutes. Then Danny's voice, stripped of its usual efficiency, just flat. The way voices get when the information they're carrying is too heavy for the ordinary inflection. The terminal accounts belong to a holding structure, multi-layered. I've been through 6 shells in the last 2 minutes. A breath. The registered beneficial owner at the end of the chain. Say it, Elara said. Draven Holdings, a subsidiary of the primary Draven Corporate Trust. The silence after was not long. It was dense. Cassian. The money terminates inside your own structure. The car. Nobody moved. Elara watched Cassian's face go through something she would not have predicted. Not denial, not controlled blankness. Actual confusion. The specific confusion of a person encountering a fact that has no home in the map of the world they have been operating from. A fact that requires the map to be wrong rather than the fact. That's not possible, he said. I have 6 layers of documentation in front of me, Danny said. It's possible. Someone planted that structure. Someone built a subsidiary inside my holding trust without my... He stopped. How? Rowan's voice came over the phone now, sharp. How do you build inside a trust structure without the principal knowing? You don't, Danny said, unless the principal built it himself and doesn't remember, or unless someone with principal-level access built it for him. A pause. Or unless the trust has a second signatory, Elara said. The silence was different this time. Cassian, Rowan said, slow. Your mother's estate. When she died, how was the trust amended? Cassian had gone very still. Not the controlled stillness of before. The stillness of a man who has just felt the ground move and hasn't finished calculating the extent of it. The trust was restructured when she died. Standard process. Her shares were redistributed to the primary holding. He stopped. Her attorney handled it. Nolan Fitch. He's been the trust's legal administrator for 30 years. Is Fitch still active? Rowan asked. He retired 3 years ago. Who did he transfer administration to? Cassian's jaw set. He picked up his phone, his other phone, the personal one, and dialed a number from memory. It rang 6 times. No answer. He tried again. 4 rings. On the 4th ring, a mechanical voice said, "This number is no longer in service." He set the phone down. Elara said carefully, "What did your mother's encrypted file say? The one you told me she left." He looked at her. "I told you about that?" "At the Opera House. Before the shooting. You said she left something, an instruction." He was quiet for a moment. "She left a file. Encrypted, staged to release if her death was ever ruled suspicious by a secondary investigation. It released 14 months ago, when a private investigator I hired concluded that her car accident was not an accident." He paused. The file contained 2 things: a list of names, financial intermediaries she'd been tracking, and a single instruction. "Trust only the daughter," Elara said. He looked at her with something that was, for the first time, genuinely unguarded. "How do you know that?" "Because you told me that's why you looked for me. That she'd been investigating the connection between my father and your syndicate's problems." She held his gaze. "She knew. Your mother knew what was being built, and she knew who was building it. And she pointed you at my father's family because she thought whatever he was holding could prove it. And someone killed her before she could tell you herself." The weight of it settled into this car like something physical. "Nolan Fitch built the subsidiary," Cassian said, "while administering my mother's estate. He created an instrument inside my own corporate structure that allowed someone to route money through my organization and make it look like I was the terminal beneficiary." He said it quietly, working through each piece. "The transfers your father documented. They were designed to make it look like I was the architect. If those records ever surfaced, I would be the one holding the bag. And Mercer would be the one who brought the evidence forward," Elara said. "The crusading district attorney who took down the head of the Draven syndicate using documentation provided by a private citizen who came to him in 2011. The shape of it was visible now, the whole architecture of it. My father came to Mercer thinking he was going to a protector," she said. "And Mercer kept him quiet. Not to protect him, to protect the setup, because if my father went public, the documents would surface before Mercer was ready. Before the case was built the way he needed it built. And when your father died, He kept the drive in the lockbox because he was afraid, she said. And because he thought he was protecting Marcus and me by keeping it hidden. And because maybe he didn't fully trust Mercer anymore, by the end. Maybe he kept it as insurance and never figured out who to actually give it to. She stopped. Her voice had gone somewhere flat and quiet that she didn't recognize. He was sitting on the evidence that could have ended all of it, and he was alone with it for years. Nobody said anything. Danny's typing had stopped. Then Cassian's phone, the one on the seat, lit up with a message. He looked at it. His expression went through several changes very quickly. He held the screen toward her. It was a photograph. Marcus, sitting in a coffee shop she recognized, 2 blocks from Aldermere's campus. Across from him, at the same table, was a man she did not recognize. 50s, well-dressed, the kind of nondescript professional that could be anything or nothing. The message beneath the photo read, "Your brother has been talking to an interesting person this morning. Thought you should see who came to find him. No sender, just the image and the line." "Who sent this?" she said. "I don't know." Cassian was already calling Rowan. "The 2 men watching the dormitory. Where are they?" Rowan's voice 3 seconds later. "At the dormitory. Marcus left at 8:15 and they followed him to..." A pause. A longer pause. "They lost him at the campus coffee house 14 minutes ago." "They're in that photograph," Cassian said. "They're sitting within 10 feet of him and they don't know who they're looking at." "The man at the table," Elara said. "Can Donnie run his face?" "Already screenshotting," Danny said from the phone, which had been on the seat this whole time, listening. "A minute. 2. The car didn't move. Elara's hands were very still in her lap, which was a different thing from being calm, she had learned a long time ago. It was just the thing you learned to do when falling apart cost more than you could afford. "Got him," Danny said. "His name is Warren Colt. He's a private investigator, license in good standing, office in Midtown. His primary client contract for the last 4 years." She stopped. "Danny," Elara said. "His primary retainer is registered to the office of the district attorney. He works for Mercer." Mercer had called. He had given her instructions, follow the money to the end. And while she was sitting in this car following his instructions, he had sent someone to sit down across from her brother in a coffee shop. "He's not threatening Marcus," Cassian said, reading her face. "Not yet. He's showing you he can. He's showing me that everything I do, every move I make, he already knows about it before I make it." She looked at Cassian. "He knew we were going to the vault. He knew we'd find the drive. He let us find it." "Because the drive is the next piece he needs in position," Cassian said slowly. "If we take the drive to anyone with legal standing, any law enforcement contact, any federal connection you have, the documentation on it looks like you're the terminal beneficiary of 16 years of illegal transfers." She thought it through. "He's been waiting for your mother's files to surface. He's been waiting for you to find the evidence and try to use it. Because the moment you try to surface the evidence, it implicates you. You take the drive public and you hand him exactly the case he's been building. And if I don't take it public, he surfaces it himself, on his timeline, framed his way." She pressed her fingertips against the edge of the seat, feeling the stitching under her nails. "He's been building this for 16 years. He's not going to let us hand him a single thing before he's ready." Cassian looked out the windshield. The concrete pillar in front of them was gray and featureless and very close. "We need to move, right now." "To where?" "Away from this structure. He tracked the vault visit. If he has eyes inside the building, we've been sitting here too long." He was already on the phone. "Rowan, new location. Use the Halsey route, not the primary. And pull the men off the dormitory. If Mercer knows they're there, there's surveillance on us, not protection for Marcus." They moved. Onto the street, into traffic, navigating in a loose configuration she couldn't see but could feel. The other vehicles somewhere around them, moving in the same direction, keeping their distance. The city was mid-morning now, indifferent, full of ordinary Tuesday, in the way that cities always were regardless of what was happening inside any particular car. Elara sent Marcus a text. "Hey, you have class this morning?" 40 seconds. "Yeah, biolab at 11. "Why?" "Just checking in. Do me a favor and go straight from the coffee shop to class. Don't make any stops." A longer pause. She could feel him frowning at his phone. "How did you know I was at the coffee shop?" She stared at that for a moment, then typed, "You always go there Tuesday mornings. I'm your sister. Go to class. You're so weird. Fine. Love you." She set the phone face down on her knee. They drove for 20 minutes to a location she didn't recognize, a building in what looked like a light industrial area, the kind of block where nobody looked at anything twice. Inside, a ground floor that had been converted to a functional workspace, servers running along one wall, maps, a folding table that Rowan already had papers on when they walked in. The kind of setup that had been prepared in advance, that had been waiting for exactly this scenario. Cassian stood at the table with his hands flat on it, looking at the map. He had the energy of a man whose processing was running faster than his face could display. She recognized it. She'd seen it in trauma bays, in surgeons, in people who were operating at the edge of capacity and converting everything into function. Danny was already remote, her voice coming from a laptop in the corner. Chen was gone, running, somewhere in the city or out of it, with 6 years of Cassian's operational knowledge in her head, talking to whoever she'd been talking to for 6 years. "Chen will surface the safe houses," Rowan said, "every location she knew." "I know," Cassian said, "which means we have, roughly, 24 hours before every fallback position is blown." "I know. And the drive is evidence that currently positions you as the primary financial beneficiary of Rowan." Cassian looked up from the map. "I know." The room settled. Elara walked to the table. She stood beside him, not behind him, beside him, and looked at the map. City grid, surrounding areas, a series of marked points she was beginning to learn to read. "The file," she said. "Your mother's encrypted file. The full version. Where is it? Secured server. Off-site. Is Chen's access level high enough to reach it?" A pause. "Possibly." "Then she either already has it or she's going for it." She put her finger on the map, on a point north of the city grid. "Your mother's investigation. She was tracking financial intermediaries. The list of names in the file. Have you run them?" "Most of them. Several are dead. Several are—" He stopped. "What?" He reached past her and pulled a printed page from a folder under the map. 7 names. She scanned them. The 5th name down stopped her cold. Nolan Fitch, the trust administrator. Already on the list, Cassian's mother had compiled years before he'd retired, years before anyone had connected him to the subsidiary structure. "She knew," Elara said. "She had him on the list." "She had him on the list and she was killed before she could do anything with it," Cassian said. "And I have been sitting on this list for 14 months without realizing what was directly in front of me. Because you were looking at the names as financial intermediaries, not as the construction crew." She looked at the rest of the list. 2 names she didn't recognize, one that was partially redacted in the printed copy. And at the bottom, handwritten in different ink than the rest, added later, she thought, added close to the end. A name that had been crossed out with a single clean line, but not crossed out thoroughly enough. She leaned in. The crossed out name was still legible. Warren Colt. "Danny, Mercer's investigator. Colt. How long has he held the retainer with the DA's office?" 4 years, Danny said. "Check before that. Check his work history going back to 2009. Typing. A pause. "Before the DA's retainer, he worked privately. His largest client between 2009 and 2019 was a personal services contract." More typing. "The contract is registered to a personal trust." Pause. "The beneficial owner of the personal trust is—" A beat. "Margaret Draven." The room. Cassian made a sound that was not quite a word. "Your mother hired him," Elara said. "She hired Colt to investigate Fitch, and at some point," she looked at the crossed-out name on the list. "At some point, she found out something about him that made her cross him off." "Either he betrayed her," Cassian said. His voice had gone somewhere she hadn't heard before, somewhere stripped. "Or she crossed him off to protect him, because she found out Mercer was already watching him. Either way, Colt had been inside this for over 15 years, either as a traitor or a buried witness. And this morning, he had sat down across from Marcus Quinn in a coffee shop 2 blocks from his college campus. Elara looked at Cassian. He looked back at her. "We have to go get my brother," she said. "If we move on Marcus right now, Mercer knows immediately. If we don't move on Marcus right now, Mercer has a hostage." He's not going to move on a college student in broad daylight. He killed your mother in a car accident and has been running a 16-year conspiracy through multiple criminal organizations while being publicly celebrated as the city's greatest crime fighter. Her voice was very flat now, very precise. What makes you think daylight means anything to him? Cassian's hands pressed flat against the table. Then Rowan's phone rang. He answered it on the second ring, listened for 8 seconds, and looked at Cassian with an expression Elara had not yet seen on his face. That was the team watching the secondary tunnel entrance, Rowan said. Someone just attempted to access the encrypted server from an internal credential. Chen, Cassian said. Chen is 3 hours outside the city according to the last ping we have on her. Rowan set the phone down. The credential used to attempt the access belongs to Victor. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. Victor is dead, Elara said. Yes, Rowan said, which means someone has his credentials. Which means, Cassian said, and his voice was the quietest she had ever heard it, that Victor wasn't killed because he was the leak. Victor was killed so someone could take his credentials and use them without him knowing. The attack at the Opera House, Victor's death, Chen's disappearance, the text about Marcus, Mercer's phone call, Colt at the coffee shop, not separate moves. One move. One continuous move that had been in motion since before Elara had picked up an unknown phone call at 2:14 in the morning, probably since before Cassian had decided to bring her into the Opera House, possibly since before she had signed anything at all. He's been running us, she said, not asking, understanding. Every response we've made since last night has been inside his plan. He wanted us to find the drive. He wanted us to trace the accounts. He wanted us to discover the subsidiary structure. She looked at the map, at the marked points, at the shape of everything they had done in the last 18 hours. He's been hurting us. Toward what? Rowan said. She looked at Cassian. He was already looking at her. And for the first time since the Opera House, since the moment she had put pen to paper and felt the world rearrange itself beneath her, Cassian Draven looked like a man who did not know what was coming next. Marcus, she said. He's hurting us toward Marcus, because Marcus is the one thing... She stopped. Started. My father kept the drive in a lockbox. He gave me the key. He didn't give Marcus anything. He kept my brother completely clean. Her voice was doing something at the edges. She controlled it. Which means Marcus doesn't know anything. Which means he has no value as leverage for information. But he has value as leverage for you, Cassian said. And for you, she said. Because whatever I am now, whatever that contract means, if Mercer takes Marcus, he doesn't need the drive to control us. He just needs a phone and a photograph and 17-year-old boy who has no idea what his father was carrying. The server alarm was still sounding somewhere in the building, Victor's credentials trying to reach the encrypted file. Mercer's architect, working a dead man's key in a lock that led to the last piece of Margaret Draven's investigation. Elara reached across the table and picked up the drive. She held it in her closed fist. Tell me, she said. Right now. Is there anything on this drive that implicates you? Anything real? Not planted, not fabricated, something you actually did? He met her eyes. No. Then we're not hiding, she said. We're not running. We go get Marcus, we get him somewhere Mercer can't touch him, and then we figure out how to use what's on this drive before Mercer does. She looked at Rowan. How fast can you get us to Aldermere? 20 minutes. Maybe 15 if we push it. Push it, she said. And then her phone rang again. She looked at the screen. Marcus. She answered. Hey, are you in class? Silence on the line. Then a voice that was not Marcus. He's fine, Mercer said. For now. I think it's time you stopped running and came to talk to me directly. I know a place. Quiet. Just us. A pause that carried the weight of a man who had been waiting a very long time for a particular moment to arrive. Bring the drive, Elara. And come alone, because if Cassian Draven walks through that door with you, your brother will not be fine anymore. Elara kept her voice level. Where? She said. You know the Hargrove Bridge, Mercer said. The maintenance access road on the east approach. There's a service building at the base of the North Tower. Come in an hour. A pause. 1 hour, Elara. Come alone, bring the drive, and your brother eats breakfast tomorrow. Bring Draven, or delay by so much as 10 minutes. He let that sentence finish itself. The line went dead. She lowered the phone. The room was looking at her. Cassian had crossed the distance between them without her noticing. He was close, close enough that she could see the specific quality of his attention, the way it had narrowed to something that was purely operational and purely focused, and not giving anything away for free. "The bridge," she said. "I heard." He had. The room was small enough. He said alone. He did. "And you're going to tell me that's not possible." "I'm going to tell you it's not going to happen," he said. Not loud, just certain. "You are not walking onto that bridge alone with the only copy of evidence that connects Mercer to 16 years of criminal conspiracy. He has Marcus. We don't know that yet." He turned to Rowan. "Aldermere now. Move every available person to—" "We don't have time," she said. "Aldermere is 20 minutes. The bridge is 25. If Marcus isn't already with Mercer's people—" "Danny," Cassian cut across her. "Can you reach Marcus's phone? Location?" Typing. 12 seconds. "His phone pinged a cell tower on Mercer Street 43 minutes ago and hasn't pinged since." A pause. "His phone is either off or destroyed." The sound Elara made was not quite a word. Cassian's hand came to her arm. Not gripping, just present. She looked at his hand, then at his face, and she made a decision that she did not think through, because thinking through it would have produced the wrong answer. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "I'm going to the bridge. You're going to be somewhere I can't see and Mercer can't find. And we're going to need a plan that doesn't get my brother killed or hand Mercer the only thing that can put him away." She looked at Rowan. "How many people do you have who Mercer hasn't burned through Chen?" Rowan's jaw worked. 6. Maybe 7. "Are any of them good enough to get onto that bridge structure without being seen?" 2 of them. "Then they go now. Before us. Before Mercer's people have finished setting up whatever they're setting up." She looked at Cassian. "You and I drive to the bridge together. You stay with the car. I go in." "That's not Cassian." She said his name the way he had said hers back in the car, chosen carefully. "I am the only person in this room who Mercer needs alive. He needs me to hand over that drive voluntarily, which means he needs me to believe Marcus is safe until the handoff happens. The moment I hand over the drive, that changes, so I don't hand over the drive." She reached into her jacket pocket and produced the flash drive. She set it on the table in front of Danny's laptop. "Copy everything on it, right now, every document, every transfer record. Encrypt it, distribute it to every contact you trust, every server you have that Mercer doesn't know about." Danny already had her hand out. "If something happens to me on that bridge," Elara said, "those files go to every federal law enforcement contact Cassian has simultaneously, every journalist, every international oversight body Danny can find in the next 55 minutes. She looked at Cassian. "The drive becomes worthless the moment it stops being the only copy, and Mercer knows enough to know that." The room was very quiet. Cassian looked at her for a long moment. She could not read everything in it. She got parts of it. Respect, resistance. The specific frustration of a man who was used to being the one with the plan watching someone else build one faster than he could object to it. "You've been thinking about this since the phone rang," he said. "I've been thinking about it since the parking structure," she said. "I just needed to know where Marcus's phone went dark." He exhaled. It was not quite surrender. It was the sound of a man deciding that the best available option was not the one he would have chosen. "Rowan." "Already moving," Rowan said, phone to his ear, walking toward the door. Danny had the drive plugged in and was working at a speed that made Elara tired just watching. 14 minutes for full copy and distribution, she said, assuming the encryption doesn't fight me. "Make it 12, Cassian said, telling you 14, hoping for 12. Stop talking to me." He stopped talking to her. He turned to Elara instead. He looked at her with the full weight of his attention and said quietly enough that it was only for her. "If Mercer has already moved Marcus somewhere else, if the bridge is a diversion while he relocates, then we'll find out when I get there," she said, "and we adjust." "Adjusting on a suspension bridge with no exit routes. I know what a bad position looks like," she said. "I've worked trauma. I know when the situation is the situation and you stop wishing it was different and you work it." She held his gaze. "I need you to trust me." He held her gaze back. Something moved in it. Not the careful selection of before. Something more unguarded. "I do," he said. "That's the problem." She almost said something. She stopped herself. There would be time for that later, or there wouldn't be time at all. 12 minutes later, Danny said, "Done. It's everywhere. Delete the drive and it's still everywhere." She pulled it out and handed it back to Elara. "He can have the physical copy and it doesn't matter." "Good," Elara said, and put it in her pocket. They moved. The drive to the bridge took 18 minutes. Cassian drove. He drove the way he did everything else, with controlled economy, no wasted motion, 2 hands on the wheel until the turns required one, both eyes ahead. She sat in the passenger seat and looked at the city and tried to slow her breathing to something that resembled normal. "You're 2 men," she said, "on the bridge structure. They know not to move unless I signal?" "They know." "What's the signal?" "If you need them, say, 'I understand.'" Those 2 words in sequence. They'll have audio. She looked at him. "You wired me while I was getting my jacket. Rowan wired you." "When?" "When you were looking at Danny's screen. He's very fast." She should have been angry about that. She cataloged the feeling and set it aside. Later. "And you? What's your line?" "I'll be on the East Service Road. 60 seconds from the service building if I run it." "Don't run it unless you hear me say those words." "Elara, I mean it. If you come in early, he panics, and Marcus is the one who pays for it." She looked forward again. The bridge was visible now. The Hargrove, 4 lanes across the harbor channel, the North Tower rising gray and massive in the overcast morning. The kind of structure that made you feel the scale of the city in a way that wasn't comfortable. "How old is it?" "The bridge? 60 years? Maybe more." "Good bones?" "The maintenance reports are apparently excellent." He paused. "I read them last year when I was considering a property on the far side." She looked at him. "You read bridge maintenance reports?" "I read everything relevant to places I might need to move through quickly." She turned back to the window. "You're a very strange man, Cassian." "Yes," he said, simply. He stopped the car on the East Service Road behind a maintenance shed that broke the sight line from the bridge approach. He cut the engine. The harbor was visible below. Gray water, cold-looking, a container ship moving slowly in the distance with the patience of something that had no reason to hurry. She reached for the door. His hand came to her wrist, not grabbing, just stopping her for a second. She looked back at him. He didn't say anything for a moment. She thought he was going to say something careful and strategic, and she was already preparing to tell him she didn't have time for it. What he said was, "Come back." 2 words. No performance in them. Just the stripped-down version of something he'd decided not to dress up. She held his gaze for 1 second. Then she got out of the car. The service road was cold and the wind off the harbor hit her immediately, the kind of wind that found every gap in her clothing and committed to them. The access road to the maintenance building was unpaved, rutted, cutting along the base of the North Tower approach. She could hear the bridge above her, traffic, the low vibration of the structure itself, the specific acoustics of something large and permanent under constant load. The service building was exactly where Mercer had described. A squat, utilitarian structure, poured concrete, a metal door with a mechanical lock that had been left open. She pushed it with her palm and went in. It smelled like machine oil and old water. The interior was a single room, pipes along one wall, a junction box, a work table with nothing on it. And at the far end, standing in the gray light from a slit window that faced the water, Silas Mercer. He was 61 years old and looked 55, which she suspected was deliberate. Silver-haired, well-built, the posture of a man who had spent decades on stages of various kinds, knowing that how you stood was part of what you were saying. He was wearing a coat that cost more than her monthly rent. He looked, standing in this utilitarian room above the harbor, like a man who was perfectly comfortable being in exactly the wrong place. He looked at her as she came in, and something warm and practiced moved across his face. Not a smile. The precursor to a smile. The kind that said, "I'm glad you came. I knew you would." She hated him immediately and completely, the way you could only hate someone when you had exactly enough information to understand what they'd done. "Where is Marcus?" she said. "Safe." He gestured vaguely, the gesture of a man who has already resolved the detail and found it uninteresting. "He's comfortable. He's not hurt. He doesn't fully understand what's happening, which is the kindest thing I could arrange for him." "Where is my brother?" "He's nearby." Mercer's voice was patient. The voice from the phone, warm and measured, even in this room, even in this light. You'll see him when this conversation produces a satisfactory conclusion. He looked at her jacket pocket, the pocket with the drive in it. Is that it? Yes. Good. He took 3 steps toward her. She held her ground. He stopped a comfortable distance away and studied her with the expression of a man who finds competent people genuinely interesting and isn't bothered by their hostility. You're more like your father than you know. Don't, she said. I mean it as a compliment. Thomas was careful. He was methodical. He held on to things because he understood that timing mattered. He tilted his head. He should have come back to me in the end. That was his mistake. He held the evidence too long, waiting for the right moment, and the right moment never arrived because he was afraid to trust his own judgment. He came to you in 2011, and you kept him quiet for 8 years, she said, and then he died. His accident was not an accident, she said, and you know it wasn't, and whoever you used to make it happen is on the list I've already sent to 7 separate federal contacts along with everything that drive contains. She let that land. She watched his face for the impact. The drive is already distributed. Whatever you think you came here for, it's already gone. The only thing that happens on this bridge today is that you either let my brother go or you don't. The warmth in Mercer's face didn't disappear. It adjusted. Something sharper moved underneath it, like a frame becoming visible through a painting. You distributed before coming. He said it without inflection, evaluating. That was smart. Draven's work or yours? Mine. He looked at her differently, not with more respect, with more calculation. Then you understand that the drive's distribution changes the situation. If those files reach the contacts you're describing before I can contextualize them, they already have. That happened 12 minutes ago. The warmth left his face entirely. What was underneath it was not rage. It was something colder and more precise. The expression of a man who has been running a board for 16 years and has just had a piece moved in a direction he didn't anticipate. Then we're negotiating differently than I planned, he said. We're not negotiating, she said. You're going to take me to Marcus, right now. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a phone. He turned the screen toward her. A live video feed. A room she didn't recognize, industrial. Marcus sitting in a chair with his hands zip-tied in front of him, awake, looking in the direction of the camera with the expression of someone who is frightened and trying very hard not to show it. Her brother, who still believed the world was roughly fair. She kept her face still. She was very good at keeping her face still. The man holding that camera, Mercer said, has a single instruction. If I don't call him in the next 15 minutes, Marcus becomes a problem that needs to be resolved. He held the phone steady, making sure she saw the timestamp in the corner. So we are, in fact, negotiating, just on a revised timeline. The door behind her opened. She turned. 2 men, both the size of decisions you didn't want to be on the wrong side of. They came in without hurrying and positioned themselves between her and the exit with the practiced ease of men who did this professionally. She was standing in a concrete room above the harbor with her exit blocked, her brother on a screen, and Mercer close enough that she could see the individual stitching on his coat. She thought, 60 seconds if Cassian runs it. She thought, don't. She thought, work the situation. You need me to publicly validate the drive's context, she said. Her voice was working. She was grateful to it. You've been planning to surface these documents with a narrative attached. The daughter of the key witness, who came forward with evidence against the Draven Syndicate. That's why you built leverage over me specifically. Not just to keep the drive quiet, to eventually produce me as the witness who hands it over. Mercer looked at her the way you looked at someone who had just done something impressive. A credible civilian source, she said. An ER nurse with no criminal connections, whose father was victimized by organized crime, who came forward despite personal risk. That's the story you've been writing, and you need me in it. You'd be well compensated, Mercer said. You and your brother. The debts disappear. New identities if you wanted them. Comfortable lives. Completely clean. He spread his hands. I'm not a monster, Elara. I've spent 30 years doing what the law couldn't do through official channels. The syndicates, the money, the violence. I've been dismantling it piece by piece, and I needed tools the law didn't provide. You manufactured gang wars, she said. I accelerated conflicts that were inevitable and directed the outcomes. The casualties would have happened regardless. You killed people. Flat, clean. You killed Margaret Draven. You killed Victor. You killed my father. Those are not acceptable losses in someone's strategy. Those are people. Her voice was very steady, and she was furious, genuinely furious, the kind that ran deep and cold rather than hot. And you want me to stand up in front of a camera and tell the story you've written? I want you to survive, Mercer said. Both options are available to you. Only one of them involves your brother walking out of that room. The phone in his hand, the timestamp, 12 minutes now. She looked at the two men by the door. She looked at Mercer. She looked at the slit window and the gray sky beyond it and the top edge of the harbor water visible below. She said, I need a minute to think. Mercer nodded, reasonable, patient. The man who had all the time in the world because he'd been waiting 16 years and 15 more minutes was nothing. She turned toward the window. She stood with her back to him, looking out at the harbor, and she thought very fast. The drive was distributed. That was done. But distributed evidence without a clean chain of custody, without a credible witness to contextualize it, without the Fitch connection fully documented. Mercer's legal team could fight it, could reframe it, could spend 3 years in courts making the subsidiary structure look like exactly what he'd designed it to look like. Cassian Draven as the architect, Elara's father as a complicit intermediary, Mercer as the investigator who cracked it. She needed Colt. Warren Colt. Mercer's investigator, who had worked for Margaret Draven before he'd worked for Mercer, whose name had been crossed off a list by a woman who was now dead, whose phone call to Marcus this morning had felt wrong from the first second she'd seen the photograph. Not like a threat, like a warning. She turned around. Colt, she said. Where is he? Something moved in Mercer's face. Small, quickly suppressed. Warren Colt, she said again. Your investigator. He sat down with my brother this morning. Why? Surveillance, Mercer said. Smooth. Establishing the timeline of, he sat across from Marcus, face visible to two of Cassian's security people, in a public coffee shop, 45 minutes before you called me. She watched his face. Colt has worked for you for 4 years and spent 10 years before that working for the woman you had killed. And this morning, he made himself visible to the one person in your organization who had every reason to run his photo and find out who he was. She took one step toward Mercer. He wanted us to find out who he was. He sat there and let us photograph him because he wanted us to pull his history. The two men by the door shifted. Mercer's jaw had gone tight. He's not yours anymore, she said. Is he? The window behind her exploded inward. Not gunfire, a shaped charge, small, precise. The specific violence of professional entry. The concussion knocked her sideways and she caught the work table with both hands, the metal edge cutting into her palms, and through the smoke and the ringing in her ears she heard shouting. Not Mercer's men, different voices, coordinated. And then the door came in too, and Rowan was through it with two men behind him, and Mercer was moving for the back wall, and one of his men was raising something, and Elara was still holding the work table with both hands trying to get her balance back. She did not say, I understand. She was not the one who needed Cassian right now. The chaos lasted 40 seconds. It felt much longer. When the smoke thinned, Mercer's two men were on the floor, not dead, zip-tied, the same efficient economy she'd been watching Cassian's people apply to problems since the previous night. Mercer was standing at the back wall with Rowan 6 feet from him, and something in his face that she had not seen there before. Fear. Real fear. Not the managed version of a man who has anticipated consequences and built responses to them. The unmanaged version that happens when the scenario you didn't plan for arrives. The south exit, Rowan said into his earpiece. He's going for the back wall, she realized. The section Mercer was standing against. It was a door. A maintenance access door, unpainted, nearly seamless against the concrete. He had known this room. He went through it before Rowan could close the distance. Rowan, I've got him. Stay with her. Rowan went through the door after him. She straightened up. Her palms were bleeding from the table edge, 2 clean cuts, not deep. She pressed them against her thighs and looked at the man Rowan had left behind. One of the two she'd been told about, big, quiet, watching her with the alert stillness of someone waiting for instructions. Marcus, she said. Mr. Draven's on the location, the man said. He found the holding point 8 minutes ago. She looked at him. He left when you went through the front door, the man said. Not apologetically, just factually. He said to tell you he'd be right behind you. She exhaled so hard the cuts on her palms throbbed with it. Then she was moving, through the back door, into a maintenance corridor that ran along the inside of the bridge approach, following the sound of Rowan's footsteps somewhere ahead, the bridge vibrating above her with the weight of 60 years of traffic and something she could feel in her teeth and her sternum and the soles of her feet. The corridor opened onto a catwalk. She stopped. The catwalk ran along the exterior of the North Tower, a maintenance walkway, steel grating, no railing on the harbor side, 60 feet above the water. The wind hit her like a physical thing, and she grabbed the tower's guide cable with both hands and felt the cuts in her palms open further and ignored them. Mercer was 20 yards ahead on the catwalk. Rowan was 10 yards behind him, and the catwalk ended at a junction where the maintenance ladder met the tower superstructure. The only direction was up or into the harbor. Mercer turned around. He was breathing hard. The perfect posture was gone. The coat was wrong. His silver hair was destroyed by the wind. He looked, for the first time, exactly like what he was. A man at the end of a plan that had run out of road. He looked past Rowan at Elara. "The files," he said. "Your federal contacts. They don't have everything. There are accounts Danny couldn't reach, structures she doesn't know exist." His voice was working to be steady and mostly succeeding. "I can give them to you, everything, 16 years, enough to dismantle half the financial infrastructure on the East Coast. In exchange for what?" she said. "You? Walking? Reduced exposure, cooperation agreement. I've seen 100 of these. I know how. You killed my father." She said it clearly, over the wind. "You killed Margaret Draven. You built a machine out of dead people and broken families, and you called it law enforcement." She took one step onto the catwalk. The grating moved under her foot and her stomach moved with it. She took another step. "You're not negotiating with me." "Then who am I negotiating with?" he said. "Nobody," Cassian said. He came from above. The maintenance ladder, descending. She had not heard him on it, which meant he had been on it for longer than she knew, which meant he had been there before Rowan, and before her, and before the shape charge. He came down the last 6 rungs and stepped onto the catwalk, and the wind moved his jacket, and he looked at Mercer the way you looked at the last problem in a very long equation. Mercer saw his face and said nothing. "Where's my brother?" Elara said. "Safe," Cassian said. "He's with 2 of my people. He's confused and scared and has a lot of questions. He's fine." She exhaled. On the catwalk, the bridge above them, the harbor below, Silas Mercer looked at Cassian Draven and understood something that she could see the understanding of in his face. The specific recognition of a man who has built his entire career on being the most prepared person in any room, and who has just met the room he wasn't prepared for. "Your mother's investigation," Mercer said. He was trying something new. She could hear it, the strategic pivot to new ground. "She had evidence beyond what she left in the file. I know where it is. I'm the only one who knows where it is." Cassian was quiet for a moment. The wind. "You used Fitch to build a structure inside my trust," he said. His voice was very level. "You used Chen for 6 years. You used Victor's death to steal his credentials. You had my mother's car tampered with, and then you spent 3 years presenting yourself as the man committed to cleaning up organized crime." He took one step toward Mercer on the catwalk. "And now you're going to tell me where her evidence is." "I'm offering—" "It wasn't a question," Cassian said. Something changed on Mercer's face. He looked past Cassian at Elara with an expression she hadn't expected. Not calculation, not performance. Something that might, in a different man, in a different life, have been close to regret. Then he looked down at the harbor, and she realized, a half second before it happened, what he was calculating. "Mercer," she started. He put his hand into his coat pocket, and what came out was not a weapon. It was a phone. He pressed something on the screen and held it up and said, "Remote detonation, 4 charges. I placed them last night." He turned the screen toward Cassian. A schematic. The bridge, the tower, 4 marked positions. Enough to bring the North Tower approach down into the channel, rush hour traffic on the upper deck. He looked at them both. 15 seconds after I press this, it stops mattering who has the files. The bridge above them. The specific vibration of it. Rush hour traffic. She could hear it. The sustained note of thousands of pounds of metal and momentum. People going to jobs and schools and ordinary Tuesday destinations with no idea what was beneath their feet. Cassian did not move. Mercer's thumb was on the screen. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She looked at the harbor below, and the catwalk, and the 40-foot length of steel grating between where she stood and where he stood, and she thought, he will do it. He has nothing left to lose, and he will do it. She was calculating the distance when the shot came. Not from Rowan. From above. The tower structure. Somewhere in the upper maintenance grid. A single crack that was swallowed immediately by the wind. Mercer's phone left his hand and hit the grating and bounced once and stopped. His right hand, the one that had been holding it, dropped to his side and he looked at it with an expression of genuine surprise. The surprise of a man encountering a physical reality he hadn't included in his model. The phone was on the grating between them. Screen cracked, the detonation interface still visible. The countdown he'd started still running. Cassian was already moving. She was already moving. They hit the grating at the same time on their knees, the wind screaming off the harbor. And Cassian had the phone, and she had his arm, and the interface had 8 seconds on it, and he pressed the cancel sequence. She could see his fingers on the screen. 4 digits she didn't recognize. 4 digits. She understood immediately that he'd known, that he'd gotten from somewhere, from Danny, from the building schematics, from the 16 years of operational knowledge that told him that a man like Mercer would build a cancellation code because a man like Mercer always left himself a way out. The countdown stopped at 3 seconds. The bridge continued its ordinary vibration above them. She became aware of her own breathing, harsh, ragged, the specific quality of air going in and out of a body that has been running on adrenaline for 19 hours. Her hands were on the grating and the cuts from the table edge were bleeding into the rust-colored metal, and she could feel every individual heartbeat in her palms and her throat and somewhere behind her sternum. Cassian's hand was on her shoulder. She didn't know when it had gotten there. Mercer was sitting on the catwalk with his back against the tower strut, cradling his right hand, looking at the harbor. The shot had not been lethal. She could see that. High velocity, precise, the specific placement of someone who had been given exact instructions about what was and wasn't acceptable. His hand was destroyed. His posture was the posture of a man who has run out of moves and knows it. She looked up at the tower. In the maintenance grid 40 feet above them, a figure she didn't recognize. A man who, when she tried to make out his face in the gray light, raised one hand toward her briefly and then was gone back into the structure. "Who was that?" she said. Cassian looked up. He looked at the empty space where the figure had been. Something moved across his face that she couldn't read. "Colt," he said. She stared at him. "Warren Colt has been running a parallel investigation inside Mercer's organization for 3 years, Cassian said. His voice was doing something she hadn't heard from it before, not quite surprised, not quite the absence of it. "My mother hired him. He went deep, deep enough that he couldn't surface without burning everything he'd built. He's been maintaining contact through a channel I didn't know existed until Danny pulled his history this morning." He paused. He knew Mercer's bridge plan. He knew the charges. He fed the cancellation code to Danny 40 minutes ago. "He sat across from Marcus this morning to get our attention," she said. "He needed us to pull his file. He needed us to know he existed before the bridge so we'd trust the code." Cassian looked at his hand, still holding the dead phone. He's been waiting 3 years for someone to be in the right position to use what he had. Mercer made a sound. Not words, just sound, low and involuntary, from the pain in his hand, and probably from something more than that. She looked at him. The man who had called her father decent, who had kept him quiet for 8 years, who had built an empire out of other people's blind trust in the machinery of the law. She looked at Cassian, still on one knee beside her on the catwalk, the harbor behind him and the bridge above, and the canceled detonation phone in his hand. She thought about her father at his desk. She thought about Margaret Draven, who had hired a private investigator and started pulling threads and had ended up in a car accident that wasn't one. She thought about Marcus, who was somewhere safe right now and frightened and had no idea how long this had been building around him. "It's done," she said, to no one in particular, to herself, to the harbor. "Not yet," Cassian said. She looked at him. "The charges," he said. I stopped the detonation, but the physical charges are still on the structure." He looked up at the bridge. "Rowan needs to clear the deck. We need the bridge authority. We need—" His phone was already ringing. He looked at the screen, put it to his ear. "Danny." He listened, his jaw tightened. "How many?" He listened again, looked at the harbor. Get the harbor authority. Now. All of them. He lowered the phone. What? She said. Mercer didn't place 4 charges, he said. He placed 7. Danny found the additional ones in the schematics he filed for the bridge maintenance permits 18 months ago. He stood up. The North Tower is clean. The remaining 3 are mid-span. Above them, the bridge. Ordinary Tuesday. Traffic that didn't know. He was already calling Rowan, and she was already following him back along the catwalk toward the maintenance corridor. And Mercer was still sitting against the strut, hand destroyed, going nowhere. And none of that mattered right now, because above them were several thousand tons of steel and several hundred people who had no idea they were sitting on top of a dead man's last contingency plan. And the morning was not finished with any of them yet. The bridge did not fall. That was the first thing. The thing that took 47 minutes of controlled chaos. Harbor authority boats in the water below, bridge deck closed in both directions, Rowan coordinating 3 separate bomb disposal teams through a radio that kept cutting out in the wind, and Danny's voice in everyone's earpiece reading structural schematics she'd pulled from a city database that hadn't been updated since 2019. But the bridge did not fall, and the traffic that had been stopped at both approach ends sat idling in the gray morning air, while the people inside those cars complained about the delay and had no idea what had been holding them over open water. Elara stood on the East Service Road and watched the disposal teams work and did not let herself think about what 3 seconds would have looked like. Cassian stood beside her. Not close enough to touch. Close enough that she was aware of him the way you were aware of heat from a fire. Not contact, just presence. He had his phone to his ear and was talking in a low, continuous voice to people she couldn't identify, coordinating things she couldn't fully follow. And she let the sound of it be background while she watched the bridge and breathed the cold harbor air and waited for her hands to stop shaking. They stopped shaking at the 30-minute mark. She noticed because she was holding a paper cup of coffee that Rowan had produced from somewhere, and the surface of it went still, and she thought, there it is. The specific moment when the body decides the emergency is over and starts the long work of processing it. Marcus was in a car 50 yards up the service road. She had been to see him twice. The first time he had grabbed her and held on with both arms and said nothing, which was not like him, which told her everything. The second time he had sat back and looked at her with the eyes of someone who has been through something he didn't have the context to understand and said, "Is it over?" She had said, "Mostly." He had looked past her at Cassian, standing by the car. "Is he why it's mostly?" "It's complicated," she said. "You signed a contract," he said. Flat. Not accusing, just stating the fact with the careful tone of someone assembling pieces they'd been given without a picture to reference. "Yes." "A marriage contract." "Yes." He looked at his hands, zip-tied in front of him. Rowan cut them free a minute later. And then at the harbor, and then at her. "Okay, eh?" he said. Not "I understand." Not "I forgive you." Just "okay." The word of someone who trusted the person in front of them enough to hold their questions until later. She loved him so much in that moment, it was almost unbearable. At the 47-minute mark, the disposal lead came down from the bridge deck and told Rowan the structure was clean. 3 devices, mid-span, all rendered inert. "Professional work," he said, the tone of someone who found the craftsmanship objectionable in a purely technical sense. Mercer had not been improvising at the end. The bridge had been his contingency for months. Mercer was in the back of a federal vehicle by that point, his hand wrapped in field dressing, saying nothing. Colt had come down from the tower structure an hour after the catwalk, walked out of a maintenance access door with his hands visible, and presented himself to Rowan's people with the specific ease of a man who had been waiting a long time to stop pretending to be something he wasn't. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with this particular morning, the kind of tired that lived in the eyes and didn't leave with sleep. He looked at Elara when Rowan brought him over. He looked at her the way you looked at someone whose file you had been reading for a very long time. "Your father talked about you," he said, "in 2013. He came to me because he'd figured out by then that Mercer wasn't going to protect him, and he didn't know where else to go." He paused. He said his daughter was the smartest person he knew and the most stubborn, and that she would probably never forgive him for what he'd gotten into. She looked at him for a moment. He was wrong about the forgiveness. Colt nodded. Just once. He didn't add anything to it. The federal agents took him for processing an hour later. He went without resistance and without looking back, and she thought he probably felt something that was not quite relief, but was close to it. The specific lightness of a person who has put down something very heavy and is still surprised by the absence of the weight. By mid-afternoon, the bridge was open again. She watched the traffic resume from the service road. Ordinary Tuesday resumed. The cars moved across the harbor in the gray afternoon light, and nobody in them knew, and that was exactly right. That was how it was supposed to work. Cassian came to stand beside her. He had finished his calls. His voice had the specific quality of exhaustion. Not rough, just stripped down to its essential register, the unnecessary parts quiet. "It's moving," he said, meaning the federal investigation. The files Danny distributed reached 3 separate agencies, 2 international. Mercer's legal team is already filing, but there's enough in the documentation to hold him pending a full review, and Colt's testimony covers the gaps. He paused. Fitch's estate. His records were sealed, but the warrant came through an hour ago. There's a secondary archive, apparently. Mercer didn't know about it. Margaret Draven's evidence, she said. Her investigative files, everything she'd compiled before she died. Colt had the location. He gave it to the federal team this morning. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the bridge. His profile in the gray afternoon light was the profile of a man who had been carrying something a very long time and had just watched part of it set down without his having to do it himself, which was sometimes the hardest way. "Your mother spent years on this," she said. "Yes." "She knew the answer was in my father's family. She pointed you at us before she died." "She pointed me at the answer," he said. "She didn't know what form it would take." He paused. She was a methodical woman. She built in redundancies. She built in Colt. Something in his voice did something quiet. "I wish I had known she'd built in Colt. I spent 3 years thinking I was working alone on her investigation." "You weren't," Elara said. "No," he said. "I wasn't." They stood there for a moment with the harbor in front of them, and the bridge in operation behind them, and the city continuing its ordinary Tuesday in every direction. "The subsidiary structure," she said. "In your trust. Fitch built it over how many years?" 5, according to Danny's reconstruction. He had enough access and enough technical cover that it didn't appear in standard audits. He paused. "It's being dismantled. The trust has been suspended pending a full independent review. Whatever comes out of that review." He stopped. "I'm not certain what the organization looks like on the other side of this." She looked at him. "What do you want it to look like?" He turned toward her then. She had asked him a version of this at the industrial workspace. "What do you get out of this?" And he had deflected. He didn't deflect now. He looked at her with the direct, unornamented attention that she had been learning to read, and he said, "Smaller, much smaller. And eventually, not at all." She held his gaze. "You mean it?" "I've meant it for a long time," he said. "I inherited something I didn't build and spent 15 years managing it instead of ending it because the alternatives felt worse. Now the alternatives feel—" He paused. "Possible," he said. "For the first time." She looked back at the bridge. "The contract," she said, "is legally registered," he said, "and is equally legally dissolvable when both parties agree to dissolve it. That process takes about 30 days. He paused. "When you're ready." She was quiet. "Elara," he said, "I'm not holding you to anything." "I know," she said. "That's not what I'm thinking about." She was thinking about 36 hours. She was thinking about the opera house and the cold and the snipers and the catwalk and the 3 seconds on the detonation timer. She was thinking about the specific quality of comeback, 2 words, no performance, in a car on a service road before she walked towards something she wasn't sure she'd walk back from. She was thinking that she had spent 2 years alone after her father died, holding everything together with tired hands, and that the experience of being in proximity to someone who was also holding everything together, badly sometimes, imperfectly always, but without stopping, was something she hadn't known she was missing until she'd had a version of it. 30 days, she said. "Is the minimum timeline?" He looked at her. "Yes." "Then we have 30 days to figure out what it looks like when nobody's shooting at us," she said, "and we'll go from there." He said nothing, but something in his face changed. Not dramatically, not the way faces changed in films, just a small and genuine shift. The kind that happen when a person receives something unexpected and takes a moment to understand what to do with it. She turned away from the bridge. I need to go talk to my brother. I know. He has about 40 questions. Probably more. He's going to want to meet you properly. Not like this. Cassian looked down the service road at the car where Marcus was waiting. I know, he said again, something careful in it. He's going to be suspicious of you, she said, for a reasonable amount of time. That's appropriate. And when he asks me whether any part of this was my choice, I'm going to have to tell him the truth, which is that most of it wasn't, and one part of it was, and the one part that was is the part I'm keeping. He looked at her. She looked back at him. She was not performing anything, and neither was he, and the afternoon was cold and the harbor was gray, and the bridge behind them was carrying its ordinary load again, and none of it was clean, and none of it had come without cost, and she was going to feel the full weight of those costs for a long time in ways she couldn't predict yet. But she was standing on solid ground. That was where she was starting from. She walked down the service road to Marcus. The federal indictment of Silas Mercer came down 11 days later, 43 counts. Money laundering, conspiracy, obstruction, and after a review of the evidence Colt had assembled and the files recovered from Fitch's sealed estate records, 3 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. Margaret Draven, Thomas Quinn. A third name Elara hadn't known. A financial analyst named Breckenridge who had worked for Fitch in 2014 and died in what had been ruled a robbery gone wrong. Mercer held his press conference from the steps of the federal courthouse on the morning of his arraignment with his attorney at his side and a statement that was 800 words of carefully prepared language about prosecutorial overreach and mischaracterization of legitimate law enforcement methodology. His voice was steady. His posture was correct. His right hand, wrapped in a compression brace, was held slightly away from his body. He looked, standing on those steps, like a man who still believed he could talk his way through this. He could not. The evidence was too complete and too distributed and too corroborated by too many sources across too many jurisdictions. His legal team was good. The case against him was better. Elara watched the press conference on a small television in the break room of the rehabilitation center. She was between a morning intake session and a group support meeting, and she had 11 minutes, and she spent 7 of them watching Mercer speak, and 4 of them thinking about her father, and then she turned off the television and went back to work. The Draven estate, the fortified compound north of the city, had been under conversion for 6 months by then. The process had been neither simple nor clean. Zoning, permits, structural assessments, the various legal complications that arose when a property's previous function required considerable documentation before any new function could be established. Cassian had navigated all of it with the same methodical patience she'd watched him apply to everything else, which was the patience of a man who understood that most important things took longer than you wanted and moved forward anyway. The center had opened in the early autumn with 12 beds, 2 full-time counselors, 1 part-time physician, and Elara Quinn as its clinical director. By the first month of operation, all 12 beds were occupied. By the second month, there was a waiting list. She had not known how much of the work she'd been doing for years in the emergency room had been downstream of organized crime, the overdoses, the injuries, the people who came in with damage that went far deeper than what was visible on the surface. She knew now. She saw it directly, without the ER's necessary distance, and the weight of it was considerable, and she carried it the way she carried everything, by continuing to move. Marcus came on weekends. He'd decided, in the months following the bridge, to change his major from biology to social work, a decision that had surprised his academic advisor and no one who knew him. He sat in the common room with residents, sometimes playing cards, sometimes just being present in the way that came naturally to him, the easy, attentive presence of a person who made other people feel seen without trying. He was good at it. He had always been good at it. He and Cassian had their first real conversation in October, in the kitchen of the main building over coffee that Cassian made badly because it turned out he had always had people make his coffee and had never learned to do it himself. Marcus watched him ruin it with the expression of someone who found this both implausible and humanizing and then fixed it without comment, and they sat at the kitchen table for an hour. She didn't know everything they said. She knew that when she came into the kitchen at the end of it, Marcus looked at her with the measured expression he used when he was updating a conclusion he'd held strongly, and that Cassian looked at his coffee, and that neither of them said anything except Marcus going, "He makes terrible coffee," and her going, "I know," and Cassian saying nothing because there was nothing to add. Warren Colt testified before a federal grand jury in November. His testimony took 4 days and covered 15 years of documentation assembled at considerable personal risk in the space between the life he was pretending to live and the investigation he was actually running. He was offered witness protection. He declined it, which surprised the prosecutors and no one who had met him. He moved to a city 200 miles north and opened a small private practice, the kind of investigative work that was quiet and local and produced no headlines. He sent Elara a letter in December, short, 1 page, the handwriting of a man who used pens because he'd always used pens. He said he was sorry about her father. He said Thomas Quinn had been, in his experience, a man who loved his children more than he feared anything else, and that in the end that love had probably been the thing that kept him holding the evidence rather than destroying it. He said he hoped the center was going well. She wrote back. She told him it was. Danny left Cassian's employ in the late winter, which was not entirely a surprise. She was 23 years old and had, in the span of 48 hours, outmaneuvered a sitting district attorney, penetrated 6 layers of financial shell companies, and prevented a suspension bridge from collapsing into a harbor channel. She received 3 separate employment offers from agencies whose names were not publishable and accepted one of them without discussing the details with anyone, which was also not a surprise. She told Elara, on her last day at the center where she'd been handling the facility's network security setup, that she'd liked working with her. "Likewise," Elara said. "You make good decisions under pressure," Danny said. "Most people don't." "Most people don't practice the way I did," Elara said. Danny considered this. "Fair," she said, and left. Rowan stayed. This was the surprise. He transitioned from operational security to something more complicated to define. He managed the center's physical safety infrastructure, trained the staff in basic protocols, coordinated with local law enforcement on the 2 occasions when a resident's previous associates made unwanted contact with the building. He was good at it in the way he was good at everything, which was to say he was thorough and undemonstrative and present when it mattered. He brought coffee every morning that was considerably better than anything Cassian produced, and he left it in the break room without announcement, and after 6 months nobody thought about the fact that it appeared there anymore, which he would have considered the ideal outcome. The syndicate dissolved. Not all at once. These things didn't happen all at once. It dissolved the way large structures dissolved, unevenly, with complications, with certain elements resisting and requiring legal pressure rather than internal decision. Cassian had been methodical about it in a way that the federal investigators found initially suspicious and eventually cooperative. He knew where everything was. He documented it. He provided what was needed. The process took most of a year, and at the end of it, what remained was what he'd said would remain. Significantly less. On its way to nothing. He moved into a smaller residence, an ordinary apartment, the kind with a view of a street rather than a fortified perimeter. He kept 2 people he trusted for reasons that had become more personal than professional, Rowan primarily, and let the rest of the operations infrastructure go the way it needed to go. He was at the center most days. The arrangement had evolved without either of them formally negotiating it, which was probably the only way it could have evolved. He handled things she didn't have bandwidth for, the legal complications, the funding structures, the occasional conversation with a regulatory body that required someone who knew how to be patient with institutions without deferring to them. She handled everything he would have handled badly, which was most of what the center was actually built to do. They worked well together. This was not a surprise to either of them, which was itself something she thought about occasionally. He was not an easy person. She had not expected him to be and did not want him to be. He was precise in ways that created friction. He was private in ways that required patience. He had opinions about the structural integrity of the building's east wing that were technically accurate and expressed more frequently than necessary. He made bad coffee and was apparently unable to learn to make better coffee despite demonstrable intelligence in every other domain, which Marcus had escalated into a mild, ongoing campaign that Cassian endured with more grace than she'd expected. He was also, she had found, a person who paid attention. Not the performed attention of someone managing a relationship. The actual attention of a man who noticed things and retained them and acted on them without announcement. She came in one morning to find that the chair at the clinical director's desk had been replaced with one that didn't make her back hurt. And when she asked him about it, he said he'd spoken with Rowan about the specifications. And when she said she hadn't mentioned her back hurting, he said she hadn't needed to, and then moved on to whatever he'd come in to discuss, and left her standing there with new chair and the somewhat frustrating realization that she was going to have to recalibrate her estimate of how observable she was. The 30 days had passed, then 60, then 6 months. She had not filed the dissolution. He had not asked. On a Thursday in late March, 7 months after the bridge, she came in early and found him in the main common room, which was empty at that hour, sitting at one of the tables near the window with a folder of papers in front of him, and coffee. He'd made himself sitting at his elbow, going cold. The morning light was coming through the east-facing windows at a flat angle, the specific quality of early spring light that was still more winter than anything else, and it fell across the table and across his hands on the folder and across the scar on his jaw that she had stopped consciously noticing months ago. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her the way he always looked at her in the first moment before the day's business started. Direct, unguarded, the version of his attention that didn't have anything in front of it. She had stopped finding it disconcerting. She had started, without deciding to, looking for it when it wasn't there. The East Wing permit came through, he said. Good, she said. She sat down across from him. She looked at the folder without reaching for it. He looked at her. Something in his posture shifted slightly. The small adjustment of a man setting aside what he was working on without making a production of it. What? He said. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the opera house, the cold, the chandelier, the photograph of Marcus, the pen in her hand. She thought about a car on a service road before a bridge, and 2 words said without performance. I'm not filing the dissolution, she said. He was quiet. He looked at her with the full weight of the attention she'd been learning to read for 7 months, and she let him look, because she was done making things smaller than they were for the sake of being easier to manage. That's a significant decision, he said. I know. Made under... He stopped. Started again, more carefully. The contract was signed under coercion. Whatever it has become since, it became something else, she said. That's what I'm telling you. He held her gaze. She held his. The morning light moved slightly on the table between them as a cloud shifted somewhere above the building. I'm not easy to be around, he said. I'm aware. You've replaced my chair and you haven't learned to make drinkable coffee, and you told Rowan the structural report on the East Wing was inadequate 3 times before accepting that it was, in fact, adequate. It wasn't adequate the first 2 times. Cassian. Yes, he said, quietly. Simply. The way he'd said I do at the warehouse, not as surrender, as choice. She nodded. She reached across the table and turned the permit folder the right way around and read the top page. When does the East Wing open? She said. End of April if the contractor holds the timeline, he said. His voice had gone back to its operational register, but something in it was different. Lighter, somehow, in the way that things were lighter when they'd been put down for a second and picked up again without the weight they'd accumulated. He won't hold the timeline, she said. No, he agreed. He won't. She made a note in the margin of the permit page. She could feel him watching her do it, the specific quality of his attention that had become, over 7 months, as familiar as her own heartbeat, present, steady, paying the kind of attention that didn't require her to perform for it. She thought about her father, at his desk, with his paper ledger and his careful arithmetic, who had carried something enormous and alone because he loved his children more than he feared anything else. She thought about Margaret Draven, who had pointed toward a daughter she'd never met because she understood that the answer was always in the people rather than the structures. She thought about a night in January when a man had placed a photograph on a table and asked her to sign something she couldn't read in full, and she had signed it because she had run out of other options. She had not run out of other options now. This was the choice she was making with her whole self on an ordinary Thursday morning in early spring, in a room full of light and bad coffee and the distant sound of the building beginning its day around them. The center would open its East Wing in May, 6 weeks behind schedule, with 20 additional beds and a new intake coordinator who came recommended by Colt and who turned out to be better at the work than any of them had anticipated. The waiting list, by summer, would stretch to 3 months. Marcus would graduate in 2 years with a degree that made him employable in ways that mattered to him, and he would spend the summer before his final year working at the center. And he would become the kind of person the residents trusted in the way you trusted people who came without an agenda. And this would surprise no one. Rowan would, in the fall, mention for the first time in 7 months something that might, in a different conversation, be described as a personal life. A woman he'd been seeing, quietly, for most of the year. And Elara would tell him it was about time, and he would look at her with the expression of a man who has been found out and is not entirely unhappy about it. Danny would surface briefly in October to tell them she'd found a third accounting layer in Mercer's financial structure that the federal team had missed, which she presented as a professional observation and not the 200-mile personal detour it clearly was, and would be back on a train within 4 hours. And Silas Mercer would be convicted on 31 of 43 counts in a trial that lasted 6 weeks and produced enough documentation to keep investigative journalists occupied for years. He would stand for sentencing on a Tuesday morning in November, and he would be, by then, an old man in a way he had not been on the courthouse steps 11 months earlier. Smaller, somehow, the posture finally gone, the warmth in his face resolved into something more accurately described as blankness. He would receive what the law provided for what he had done. The judge would read the sentence in a voice that was flat and procedural, and without the drama that the crime had contained, because that was how the law worked at its best. Quietly, without theater, because the theater had already happened and cost enough. Thomas Quinn's name would appear in the trial record 73 times. His contribution to the documentation that had built the case would be noted by the prosecution in their closing statement, and by 2 of the journalists who covered the trial extensively, and by the judge in the sentencing commentary in a single sentence that described him as a man who had made a mistake and spent years trying to correct it without a way to do so safely, which was, she thought, as accurate a summary as 11 words could contain. She would not be in the courtroom for the sentencing. She would be at the center, between sessions, in the break room with cold coffee and a chart she needed to review before the afternoon. She would read the verdict on her phone and sit with it for a few minutes in the ordinary noise of the building around her, and she would think about her father the way she thought about him now, not with the complicated grief of someone managing an unresolved account, but with the simpler ache of someone who had lost a person they loved and had come, over time, to understand that the love didn't require the person to have been perfect. He had carried it as long as he could. He had kept it where he thought it was safest. He had left it where he knew she would eventually look. She thought he would have liked to know how it ended. She thought he might have found some peace in it, which was not the same as justice, which was not the same as enough, but which was something, which was more than nothing. She finished her coffee. She picked up the chart. She went back to work. That was how it was. That was how it remained. Not clean. Nothing real was clean. Not simple. Nothing earned was simple, but present and ongoing, and built on something that had started as a signature in the dark, under a broken chandelier, and had become, through all the fire and cost and impossible mornings, a foundation that neither contract nor coercion had created. Something they had built themselves, piece by piece, out of the wreckage, which was the only way anything worth having had ever been built.